Mr. Daane, we welcome you this morning. We're ready for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Your Honor, members of the Commission. During my personal interviews with a number of you, I talk about my perceived need for, especially in the current environment, for those of us in the third branch, and particularly those serving on the court, to work very hard at being humble as we deal with the public. And so I come before you today to brag myself up, streaming live on the internet. I do want to cover a little bit of my personal background because I think it helps give context to the application information. I was raised in Sturgis, South Dakota. I'm a fourth-generation South Dakotan. My dad worked nights at the now famous Gunner's Lounge in Sturgis to put himself through college and to become the junior high school principal at my hometown. He was also a full colonel in the South Dakota Army National Guard. And my mother put herself through college as well because her father didn't believe women ought to go to college. My mother retired as the chief nurse and associate director of Hines VA Medical Center in Chicago, Illinois. And we were all extremely proud of the fact that she was the first nurse in VA history to be an associate director of a VA. My sister has her doctorate in civil engineering from University of Washington and is a principal in CDM, one of the larger engineering firms in the United States. And my brother is a vice president of one of the nation's largest fire protection companies. And so my father is very fond of bragging to his friends that his son is a lawyer, but the other two turned out great. One of the most formative experiences of my young life was my selection by the American Legion as one of two students from each state to attend American Legion Boys Nation in Washington, D.C. in the summer of 1977. That was a mock Senate experience with 100 boys from around the nation. And the exposure that we were given to our nation was an inspiration to me about our system of government and the special and unique role that lawyers play in that process. It inspired me to want to become a lawyer. So I attended the University of South Dakota, where I played 4 years of football, earned a business management degree, and an Army ROTC commission. The Army granted me an educational delay to attend law school, which I did right there at the university. I had some extraordinary opportunities provided to me from the hometown law firms in Sturgis, which I think I documented for you in my application. While I was in law school, I fell in love with a speech therapy student from Sioux City, Iowa, and shortly after graduation from law school, we were married, and last fall we celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary. Immediately upon graduation from law school at the tender age of 24, I was sent off to Fort Ord, California, where I served for 3 years on active duty with the 7th Infantry Division, which at that time was stationed in Monterey, California. It was pretty tough duty. I spent 3 years on active duty with the 7th, 1 year as a medical care recovery judge advocate, and 2 as a prosecutor, or as we like to call it in those days, a trial counsel. I absolutely loved the Army. I tried cases against lawyers from some of the best law schools around the country, including University of Texas, Notre Dame University, and the University of Iowa. They became my best friends. And as I provided to a few of you during my personal interviews, I performed very well in the military and was recognized for my service. That experience developed in me the confidence and the abilities that I have enjoyed and that have sustained me throughout my career. Coming from a small state of South Dakota, sometimes you can have an inferiority complex, and that experience really helped me overcome those insecurities. I would have made the Army my career, but Tammy and I wanted a family and the stability that comes from having a quality life and quality public schools, and so returning to Iowa was a natural for those reasons. So in June of 1988, at the end of my 3-year active duty tour, I took the then 100% SA Iowa bar exam and began private practice in Sioux City, where I have remained. My first firm in Sioux City was a business firm called Corbett Anderson. I did primarily real estate, business associations, and the associated probate and title clearing work that comes with that type of practice. I did some civil and criminal litigation. That experience was I was blessed for that experience because of the outstanding lawyers that were present in that firm. I was able to mentor with some really excellent people, learn how to do things right, which prepared me as I moved on to my own firm. I did make partner at Corbett Anderson in '91, but I was yearning for more litigation work, and so in September of '94, a law school friend of mine and I formed our current firm, where for over 16 years we have now engaged in a litigation practice. I practice primarily in the areas of personal injury litigation, business litigation, criminal defense, and juvenile court work. During that time, Tammy and I have raised 3 children. My son Nicholas is a senior at Iowa, double majoring in biology and physiology. My daughter Jillian is a sophomore at South Dakota. She's majoring in elementary and special education, and I have a freshman girl at East High School in Sioux City. During my private practice years, I did a significant amount of pro bono and legal service work, public service work. I've served on the boards of my service club and Big Brothers Big Sisters of Siouxland for many years, including a year as president of both of those groups. I've been on the board of my church. I've served for 20 years on the Economic Development Board in my hometown. I was elected by the residents of Sioux City to 2 terms on the Sioux City School Board, which is the 4th largest district in the state with over 14,000 students. Our board was recognized in school year 05-06 with the T.E. Davidson Award by the Iowa Association of School Boards as one of the outstanding school boards in the state. I've also been very active in the legal community. I was the chair of the Woodbury County Fee Arbitration Committee since 1998. I was elected for 8 consecutive years to the Board of Governors of the Iowa Association for Justice and was recently elected to their executive committee, which puts me on a 5-year track to the presidency of that organization. Finally, in January of 2010, I was honored to be elected by my fellow District 3B members as a member of the Judicial District 3B Nominating Commission. I believe this background provides me with 3 strengths for you to consider for my service on this court. First, I think I have an unusually broad and diverse practice background. I don't think there are a lot of lawyers in the state who have had as many years and as many different areas of practice as I have enjoyed. I think that's important given the wide variety of cases that come before this court, and I do think that having a practitioner's point of view is often a benefit to people that are deciding cases. Secondly, I have a history of challenging public service. I think those of us in the room old enough to remember what it was like to be in ROTC in the 1970s understand that that was not an easy decision to make. I served on my church board at a time of crisis for our 2,500 member congregation when we were undergoing the risk of a split, and we were able to heal those wounds through communication. And I also served on a school board, and I don't think I need to tell you a whole lot about how that's a challenging public service event. I guess in short, I'm not afraid of tough situations, and I have experience in interacting with the public in emotional times. I think I have demonstrated over the years that I get that the people are at the top of the organizational chart for those of us in public service. Lastly, thirdly, I have a passion to communicate the nature and strengths of the third branch to the people of our state. We're all obviously keenly aware of the challenges brought on by the recent retention election, but I believe that this is just the latest in a developing problem that we need to address more directly. As a young man, the lawyers in my hometown were among the most revered. Today, we are judged largely by an inaccurate political narrative. We are sometimes openly scorned. We all know that this is wrong. The lawyers I practice with every day remain some of the finest men and women in my community. They are generous with their time and resources. They provide enormous public service. They facilitate transactions that benefit my community. They help people out of crisis and into productivity. And as I am reminded by the many hours I sat at assemblies, honors assemblies at our high schools, they raise some of our very best students. I don't think you need to look at the applicants for the position that are before you today to know that as a profession, lawyers are among the very best of citizens. So I believe we need to be more proactive at attacking this misrepresentation of our character. I believe that in addition to the traditional skill sets of legal analysis and writing ability, you need to look at a second skill set, and that is people who are willing and able to respectfully, humbly, factually, and objectively engage citizens around the state in discussions about their concerns of our system. We need to listen and communicate because it is more difficult to demonize those with whom you interact. As Chief Justice Cady so ably demonstrated in his State of the Judiciary address, our current court members clearly have these skills. I believe that the 3 new court members must have them too, and I believe we all must be willing to put those skills to work. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Daane. Any questions to the left side here? Mr. Holm?
Good morning, and thank you very much for your application. I wonder if you'd just tell us a little bit about what it is about the job of being a justice on the Supreme Court, what it is about that challenge that has attracted you to apply for the position.
The honest answer to that, Mr. Holm, is that I think many of us around the state, as is evidenced by the large response to this application pool, are perceived that there wouldn't be any quality candidates in light of what was going on. And that's actually what drew me to do this, was a concern that there would not be quality applicants for the position because of the current environment. I have been so pleasantly surprised to be wrong. There is an outstanding pool of applicants before you. And so the reality is that's why I was drawn. I am now obviously immersed in the process and would very much like the position. But that's what drew me here.
And I think I would point out that you certainly added to the quality of the applicant pool that we have.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the left side? Mr. Brody?
Yeah. I wasn't preparing to ask a question this time, but
Well, it's like an auction. You put your hand up and you buy it.
I did. You talked a bit about it, but I was wondering if you could maybe talk a bit more about how we got to where we're at right now with the results of what happened in November, with maybe some of the other issues. I don't want to steal anybody else's question, but I think you being from Sioux City, a long distance away from Des Moines, and being a graduate of a college up in Sioux City, there is a big difference. And so I was wondering if you might bring some perspective to what the river cities think about the situation we're in right now.
Well, I think our community is very much like the rest of the communities in Iowa. It's very much a split decision. I think that there are a group of Iowans who, for largely personal conviction reasons, were upset with a decision of the court and decided that single issue politics was an appropriate way to address their concerns in a retention election. I think there are a large number of other citizens who, whatever their view of that particular decision, recognize that we can all find individual decisions about which to be critical, but that there are other ways to address the concerns that people had about that decision, and that attacking the judicial system in general and loyal, talented, career-minded, dedicated individuals is the wrong way to do that. So, you know, the point of my opening remarks was to indicate that I don't believe that this is all about a single decision. I believe that we live in an environment have allowed the narrative about our profession taken from us. We're not regarded as Atticus Finches anymore. Lincoln did for a living, and I think we need to go back there. We need to educate the public. We need to treat them in a way that they want to be treated, but we need to provide them the information and the facts that will help them conclude that the third branch is a very, very important part of our system, and that there are reasons for them not to react the way they did in November.
Mr. Cook?
Sir, thank you for your very thoughtful comments, and particularly your reference to Abraham Lincoln. Tell us what value you think your military experience brings to your application and whether we should consider that.
Well, I would consider my military service only in two ways that I think would be helpful to you. Number one, I think it does evidence a servant's heart. I think that people who serve our country in the military are very much like the people who serve our government in many other ways. And public service is sometimes a thankless job. And so to the extent that somebody would volunteer for that service, I think it's relevant to you in deciding whether or not the person has the right characteristics for another public service position. The other way that I think it would be valuable for you to evaluate is that a young JAG officer, particularly a trial counsel, gets exposed to a lot of good stuff. I got to try a lot of cases as a young man, and that helped with my confidence throughout the rest of my career. And to the extent that to the folks on this commission who have some of my OERs and other information, I would hope that they would share that with you during your discussions, because I think it would indicate to you that my military service indicates that I'm up to do the work.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Any questions on the right side? Ms. Dixon?
Good morning, Mr. Daane. I note with interest your writing sample that you submitted was a brief that you argued in front of the South Dakota Supreme Court. And I wondered if you could just speak to your appellate practice in South Dakota, and if there's anything that you've gleaned from that process that you would bring with you to the Iowa Supreme Court.
Well, South Dakota is obviously a much smaller place. And so I've actually had more appellate work in South Dakota than I have here in Iowa. More a function of the fact that I needed to more than any other reason. I had some decisions that I thought were wrong there, and it is a little bit easier in terms of the process to get a case heard in South Dakota. I think with less people and less cases, there's not quite the caseloads that our courts face, and so that's an obvious difference. But overall, the process is not significantly different. The briefing schedules are similar. The expectations and the requirements for both written and oral work are very, very similar. And I think that probably the single biggest difference in the judiciary between South Dakota and Iowa is that in South Dakota, the trial bench is subject to routine elections, and they're not retention elections, they are direct elections. So from that perspective, I much prefer this state. I hope that was responsive to your question.
Is there anything that you would, maybe there isn't, is there anything that you would take from your appellate practice in South Dakota in terms of its process that you would suggest the Supreme Court and I would do differently? And maybe there isn't. I just wondered.
You know, the honest answer to your question is not from my appellate practice, but from the trial practice I would. South Dakota has a provision in its law that's similar to the Maryland plan, where for cases of value under $75,000, you can forego the depositions of the trial experts if the doctor is willing to sign an affidavit as to admissibility of his underlying medical records and medical bills. Defense counsel can still go take the depositions of the doctors, everything's still fair game, but it reduces the burden on injured parties to establish the foundational elements of a case with a value under $75,000. I think that's a provision that's long overdue in Iowa, and I would work hard to try to see some type of version of that adopted in our court system.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the right side? Mr. Pace?
Thank you, Justice Wiggins. Good morning.
Good morning.
My sister has been a teacher in Sioux City for many years, so thank you for your service there. I'm sure it was non-controversial and very easy the whole time you were there.
You obviously don't know us well.
I was being a little facetious there.
Thank you for her service.
You have said several times we need to, and not just the court, but the bar needs to communicate with the public about what the third branch or the judicial branch is doing, its responsibilities, what it's supposed to do, and what it is doing every day to get justice served here for the folks of Iowa. But can you give me some ideas about some specific things that we could do, the court and the bar could do?
Thank you for that question. I recently concluded a multi-year term on the Public Education Committee of the Iowa Association for Justice, and we have worked up a Speakers Bureau plan to try to go out into the Rotary clubs and basically anybody who will let us come and talk to them. We also are trying to liaison with the Iowa State Bar Association to see whether we can get some Department of Education approval to present some curriculum to students that is pre-approved, so it's non-controversial. But, you know, that would facilitate lawyers going into our schools and helping with basic legal education as a guest speaker for a civics class, for example. The trouble with those efforts is that they are perceived to be political in nature. The nature of the attorney that's selected for that position is always going to be subject to question, and that's why I believe that the courts are uniquely positioned to provide a nonpartisan, non-controversial resource to make some of those presentations. These presentations would be entirely factual. The state court administrator is a wealth of information that people in the public just don't know. People in the public have a perception about our court system that is completely wrong. There were 212 jury trials in the state of Iowa a couple of years ago. We have 100 counties. That is completely inconsistent with the public's perception of what's going on. And I don't think that it would be difficult in a non-controversial way to present those facts to the public. And I think if we did so with earnestness and with humility and respect for anybody with a contrary view, the facts would win out. And I think we need to make that effort. I hope that's response to your
Yes,
question.
thank you very much.
Professor Cochran, I think you had a quick question.
Pretty minds think alike. Steve had my question.
Okay, any further questions? Well, Mr. Daane, we thank you very much, and we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.